There we go. Let me do my introduction and then you can turn sharing back on.
Okay.
Okay, I want to welcome everyone to Museum Studies' second webinar of 2023. Don't reinvent the wheel, using SAMR to create virtual programs inspired by your in-person programs. I am Brad Breedyhoff with Museum Study. Museum Study provides online professional development for people who work in or with cultural institutions. Today's presentation will be by one of our instructors, Hanel, an educator in both the museum field and K-16 education. She is currently a high school history teacher at a virtual school and the education advisor at Girl Museum, which is a virtual museum. Her experience working as both a museum educator and classroom teacher gives a unique perspective to developing museum programs. Hillary leads our 4-week-long course, Creating Virtual Learning Opportunities in Museums, which will run in July this year. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. I will send a link to the recording for all who registered for today's webinar once it is available. Please mute yourself during the presentation and feel free to use the chat window to ask any questions, which Hillary will answer during Q&A after her presentation. You can unmute yourself at that time also to ask questions. All right, Hillary.
Thanks, Brad, and thanks for hosting this, and thanks to all of you for coming today. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. All right, and yeah, feel free to use the chat anytime for questions. Since I teach online all the time, I'm really used to watching the chat, and I'm happy to answer questions during or after. But we will go ahead and get started. So what we're doing today, we're going to talk a little bit about where you currently are with virtual programs, do a little bit of an introduction to this specific model for creating virtual or just using technology in some of your programs, whether it's in person or virtual. Some tech tips and tools. We'll go over a couple of examples, and perhaps I hope we'll have time at the end for an activity, and then we'll have question and answers. So if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourselves in the chat a little bit and tell us what museum you're with and your location. I think it would be great just to see where everyone is. And I just put up there a fun question of your favorite type of wheeled vehicle, since we're not reinventing the wheel today. I know a lot of museums have some cool antique bicycles, so I put one of those up there.
Okay, well, I'll kick this off. My name is Keith Bomer. I'm with the Okanagan Military Museum in Kelowna, BC, Canada, and I've been with the museum for about 20 years, and taking on more of a public programming, school touring function with my colleagues, Solange and Alana. And they can inform you more on where the Kelowna Museum is currently with our technology in our programs. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And if anyone else wants to hop on mic to introduce yourself, feel free, but I see a lot coming up in the chat as well. Looks like a nice mix of different genres of museums.
I guess, Keith, because you introduced me. Hi, everyone. I'm Solange, so I'm also with the Kelowna Museum Society. Yeah, I'm the head of programming here, and like you were saying, Alana's a part of our education team. She's our Indigenous program assistant. For switching things to virtual, right now we do have like pre-existing programs, but we're kind of just figuring it out as we go. So I think this webinar is going to help us a lot with some tricks and some ideas what we can do to make it a little smoother, because we have the tech, but maybe there's other tech we can think of, or just making it more immersive for the audience.
Great, good. I'm glad to hear that you kind of have a start of things. Awesome. Anyone else want to hop on mic, or feel free to just keep adding to the chat as well. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone again for being here. I hope at the end when we do our activity, we can share a little bit more about the work you've already done or are hoping to do as well. Brad already introduced me, so I'll kind of skip over this part. And then at the end, I'll also give you some of my contact information if you want to reach out with any further questions. But first, and I know a couple of you mentioned already where you stand if you've started creating virtual programs, maybe your comfort level with developing those, using technology, facilitating online programs. Does anyone want to share kind of where you stand currently with your virtual programs or just using technology in your programs? I know a lot of museums started transitioning into virtual like in 2020 with the pandemic, and then continuing to do that work. Is that kind of where we're at probably?
Yeah, I can kind of speak on that a little bit. So Kelowna Museums, during the pandemic, we definitely went to virtual, and what that sort of looked like is it was Zoom programs mostly, but we really tried to incorporate some like participation from the class. So we would like get them to like say like put up one finger if you think it's this, put up two fingers if you think it's that, or we'd like give them body breaks and get them to like do yoga and stuff, or we'd ask them to come up to like the mic to answer questions. We also did like a lot of virtual tours where we had like one of those push carts with like a Samsung tablet on it, which has a really good camera, and we just kind of go around the museum, like going up really close and stuff.
Good.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love how you incorporate the, things for students to actually do, moving and interacting. That's awesome. And good evening. I see a couple more people joining us. We are really just getting started. So let me go forward here. So first, a little background and why I like to teach about virtual programs in museums. There's a challenge and an opportunity here, being that you all work in museums and have probably worked with education programs in the past in person. It can be really tough for teachers to take their students on field trips. And these are some of the main reasons I found when I surveyed teachers a few years ago. Of course, money, it can cost money for the busing, for the admission to your museum, any program costs. Time and curriculum really tie in together. It needs to fit into what the teachers are needing to teach and cover each year. And finding the time in the day to remove yourself from the classroom, get to a museum for a field trip can be a big challenge. And especially for rural museums or rural schools that are some distance from a museum, that can really be a challenge as well. So we know that for our in-person field trips and programs, those can be tough. And that's why I think virtual museum programs are really a great opportunity to reach more students and more teachers who are struggling with some of those aspects of coming to you in person. So you can still have an impact and reach those kids. And related to that is the idea of schools that are totally virtual. This has grown a lot, especially since 2020. As I mentioned before, I teach totally online. I teach at a virtual high school. So the enrollment numbers here, I don't have this current school year enrollment numbers, but they seem to be pretty steady, having increased quite a lot after 2020. So even besides just a normal in-person traditional classroom, doing your virtual field trip, students who are at home, their teachers are at home, all doing their schooling online. This is a great opportunity for an audience you could reach as well. So next I want to just introduce the SAMR model. And this is something that can be applied both for totally virtual programs or just incorporating technology into your in-person programs or maybe even your exhibits as well.
Hillary?
Yeah.
You want to share your screen again?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it wasn't sharing again. Thank you. There we go.
Now
It
it's
doesn't
coming
show
up.
me the old menu, so I didn't even know it wasn't sharing. There we go.
We see it now.
Perfect. That helps definitely. All right, here we go. All right, so I like to start off with this diagram, which I did not create, but I think it's a really good visual of how SAMR is used for technology integration. So we can all picture standing on the beach, looking out at the ocean. It's beautiful. We can see some stuff, but we're not really, immersed in the ocean experience so much. And so no tech, just our traditional in-person programs can be starting there. If we want to get our feet wet a little bit, get out in the canoe, then this is going to be when we're adding technology as a substitute for some piece of what we're doing. But there's no really functional change. It's the same thing, we're just adding something in. And then augmentation, you're a little more in depth here in your experience. You're snorkeling just under the surface. You can see and feel more. So your technology is going to be a substitute, but also have a functional improvement of some sort. So those two first steps are an enhancement. They're not really changing anything too major, and they're a great starting point. As you get deeper into your technology integration, modification is the next one. Your scuba tank is going to add a lot more depth to your ocean exploration. And this is going to be a significant task redesign. You're not only substituting in a piece of tech for something you typically do, but you're going to be creating something that is a little different from what you do in person. And finally, the last stage here in SAMR is redefinition. So of course, your submarine, you're going to go a lot deeper and have a lot more technology at your fingertips when experiencing the ocean in this diagram. And it's going to allow new things to happen that previously just in person, no tech, you just wouldn't have been able to do. So these two are going to be a transformation of your program. And I'm going to give some examples, but I just really like this model to kind of visualize what each of those looks like. So on my little flow chart here, just a quick example to visualize what these look like for a museum program. The first one is to substitute. An example would just be creating a slideshow instead of exhibit labels. So if you're in the gallery, typically you have your label on the wall explaining whatever artifact or piece of art. Maybe it's a slideshow there showing more information. Pretty simple substitution, no functional change. You're still getting the same, pretty much all of the same info. If you want to take it a step further using the augmentation idea, you can add to that slideshow with some multimedia. Your paper label isn't going to have video or music, anything like that, but you could create your slideshow with some of those additional features to just enhance it. A modification could be creating an interactive set of activity slides. So it could have some of those multimedia features like sound and video. It could have links that students or participants could click on and find additional resources on your own museum's website. Maybe you have digitized collections it would lead them to, and some sort of interactive activity, which I'll share some examples of shortly. And then the last stage is the redefinition. So this is the kind of highest level of implementing technology. The example I like to use is a choose your own adventure, like multimedia virtual tour. Those can be a lot of fun and really create a personalized experience for a museum, just a museum participant in one of your programs or a K through 12 audience. So that they can really interact and be immersed in the experience and make a lot of choices to guide their experience. Any questions so far that I can answer? Those are kind of the main steps of SAMR, and we'll get into some more specific examples next. All right, just keeping an eye on the chat. I actually have 3 monitors, so I moved the chat over onto my third one in case anyone has questions. All right, so next we will take a look at an example. If you're already familiar with creating in-person programs, you might follow something like this, especially if you create for school audiences where you're using some curriculum standards. So you probably have some learning objectives that you're trying to meet. Starting with that, you're looking at what your museum already has, your exhibits, things in your collections, what is your expertise or the expertise of your staff that you can share. Available tools, whether it's the tools you have for in-person or maybe some technology that you are looking forward to using. And then of course, time is a big part of what you're planning to create as well. So once you have your objectives, your museum's stuff and offerings figured out, that's when you decide, how are you going to reach those learning goals and make your program around that. So that's just the basics that can be used for in-person or virtual. So if you're designing an in-person program, say about this goal of teaching about World War II, you pick out some artifacts I've listed here. And then your in-person program, maybe you're going to start with your tour of your museum's World War II exhibit. And then you're going to have students focus on these 4 artifacts: ration tickets, a Victory Garden poster, an old bicycle, a photograph of a woman working on an airplane. So the class will look at those a little more closely, have a short class discussion, trying to relate it to their own lives. And then in person, they're going to work on a timeline. Maybe it's a magnetic timeline up on a whiteboard, and they're going to work together to place events in order. So that would work great in person. Now, if you are going to use that same learning goal that we have here and transform this into something interactive that's virtual, we want to look at the SAMR model. So again, I have the same learning objective, the same artifacts from your museum. So you're not reinventing the wheel and digging through your collections or exhibits to find something different, but you are going to maybe substitute your in-person tour of the gallery to a virtual tour of your museum's World War II exhibit. And it could be, like Alana, you had mentioned earlier, literally taking the cart through your exhibit with the camera and showing it that way, or maybe you've created some sort of virtual website tour. Either one, that's kind of a substitution. Maybe for your next step, you're going to augment that closer look at these 4 specific artifacts that you want students to really look closer at. And perhaps you've digitized those in your museum's online collections on your website, and students can go on there and they can zoom in and look at it more closely. They can look at additional information more so than maybe what would be on the label in your gallery. And then they can have a virtual class discussion, whether you're live presenting to them and interact with the students on camera like we are, or they're in the chat, or if it's asynchronous, maybe they could be responding to like a message board. So this is augmentation. You're going to be enhancing it a little bit with some digitized artifacts. And the third feature, when previously you'd had students working on that magnetic timeline in person, for a modification, you could create a Google Classroom assignment that would have links and places for students to interact and type and drag and drop on their interactive timeline, and perhaps a diary entry. So we have the same learning objective, the same artifacts. Your staff has the expertise about World War II that you're teaching here, but just changing up how you are achieving those learning goals. All right, so that's just one quick example. And I'll share a couple of my very early attempts at SAMR. I had taught in person for a number of years as a history teacher, just traditional classroom in person. And some of the things that I did in person, I loved, and I wanted to bring them to my online classroom. But at first I wasn't really sure how to best go about it. So I'm going to show you just a couple of my early attempts. And let me just stop sharing for a moment and bring up my other screen here. All right. Okay, here we go. Let me screen share again. These were very simple, just done in Google Docs. Here we go. All right, are you able to see? Perfect. So as I mentioned, these are some early attempts, so they are not very pretty. This is a Google Doc assignment for an ancient civilization vacation. So my students in my world history classes were studying ancient civilizations, and instead of a traditional like research one of these ancient civilizations and tell me about it, I created something where they were pretending to go back in time on a vacation there. So all the instructions were there, and then students actually were completing this assignment virtually on this Google Doc. So they would each have their own copy, or if they were working with a group, have a copy to all be able to collaborate and type on. So for example, they were making their packing list as they were researching types of clothing and different products and foods used by that civilization. They're choosing some souvenirs that they're going to pick out to bring back home. They could add photographs here and type on it. They would then have to plan out a trip itinerary, discussing some of the landmarks, some of the geography of the area, some of the government features if they're visiting, you know, whatever leader is of that civilization. So they're adding images and text. And then finally, they were creating an essay, which I had outlined here for them. And then they would present this to our class virtually. So again, very early attempt. It doesn't look very polished, but it's an easy way to get started with virtual. One other activity that I really enjoyed doing with my students virtually was mapping the 20th century. So at the end of the school year, and we had just finished covering the whole 20th century in our second semester, I wanted them to choose which you know, events they found were most impactful or most significant of the 20th century. So I had them first fill out some information here with descriptions of the events. They had to find a picture and some dates for those. And then after they filled out this basically spreadsheet and I approved what they had written, then they were going to put that on a Google map. So if you've used Google My Maps before, you can add little pinpoints, add photos, information. Unfortunately, the map, since my students created this many years ago, it did not survive the transition to my personal Google Drive. So I don't have the map to share with you, but there's lots of fun tools in Google if that's a platform that your museum utilizes. So just a couple of my early attempts there. And let's see. Let me get my slides open back up here. So next, I just want to share a very few tech tips and tools because that can be kind of overwhelming when getting started sometimes. There's a lot of different platforms to use and then a lot of ed tech tools besides your basic Zoom and things. So choosing what platform is going to work best for you or your museum can be a good thing to start with. So a few things to consider. First is the cost. Even things like Zoom, in order to use it really efficiently, you're going to want to have a subscription to it so that you can have more than a few participants. And so you're not limited to like 40 minutes of a Zoom meeting and to have some of those additional features. So thinking about the cost to start up whatever platform you choose, if it's a subscription, that's going to be an ongoing cost. And then any upgrades you might need to make to maybe hardware, if you need better cameras or better computers, there's a lot to think about with that. Maybe you already have some existing hardware and software you want to use and stick with that to start with. That's always a good choice as well. Another thing to consider, of course, is your staff expertise. If you already have experience using a certain program, starting there is good. If you need to do some additional training, I highly recommend that as well. And then audience preferences, depending on who your main audience is, you'll want to think about this. If you are mainly presenting to school groups, talk with your local school districts who you are typically working with. Maybe they're a Google school and they like to use Google Meet and the Google Slides, and that's best to reach most people in your audience. Then I would go with that. If you're presenting to like adult audiences or the general public, maybe Zoom is an easier one as so many people are familiar with this platform. So I would definitely reach out to your audience and kind of see what works best for them. And then as you're picking out platforms, making a list of some of the must-have features. I know a lot of times if you're trying to have a more interactive presentation, having some sort of whiteboard tools is a helpful one, having a chat available. Some programs you might utilize the closed captioning in your, if it's a Zoom or something like that. So make a list of those must-haves so you can check those boxes as you're picking your platforms. As I mentioned, some good tools to start with to keep things simple. Zoom, Google Meet, people are pretty familiar with those. If you are creating some asynchronous programs that you're recording and sharing links to, I like these screen recorders. Both of them operate pretty similarly. Screencastify or Screencast-O-Matic, where you can record, your face can be on it, your screen can be on it, similar to how I'm screen sharing here, and it's just recorded. And then Google Slides, Jamboard, which we'll get to work on here in a moment, and Google Maps are other really simple things to help get started. And as far as ed tech tools, especially if you're working with student audiences, K through 12, there's some fun ones, like if you've ever heard of Kahoot, that's kind of a quiz game platform you can use to make an interactive game. There are other similar ones like Gimkit and what's the other one? Quizlet. There's a lot of those different gamified programs that are free online and that you could subscribe to make, you know, more in-depth programs. But those are great starting points for school audiences. All right, so any questions before I introduce our activity? Just about the SAMR model or any education program stuff? All right, so I will show you what our activity looks like, and then we'll be using Jamboard, which is one of those platforms I recommend because it's really easy to set up and easy for people to use. So each of you will have basically like a whiteboard slide on this Jamboard that I'll give you the link to. And I would like you to think of your favorite or maybe your most popular program that you already do in person at your museum. That's a good one to start with, something that you're already super familiar with. And then I'd love for you to do a quick brainstorm. And of course, this isn't something that you really need to hash out all the details or anything, but think about how you could make it virtual or how you could add some tech to it using one or more of these SAMR components. And while you're working on the Jamboard, I'll bring my slides back to that example slide if you need some help kind of kickstarting what you could do. So I'll give you the link to this. And if you wouldn't mind starting by adding in the center circle here, a brief description of what that in-person program is all about or how you do it. And then choose one or more of these in the corners to write about how you might transform that. So let me grab the link here. And Jamboard is really a great tool because you can each grab your own slide. I hope everything's okay with the weather there. All right, so you can go ahead and grab that link from the chat. And if you've never used Jamboard, I will share that how it works as well. So I have 20 of these whiteboards set up. So everyone go ahead and go to one and can claim it by, there's a little text box tool here, and you can just maybe write your name on it or something to claim one of those slides. I'll give everyone a moment to do that. So again, the text box tool is down here. And then you can just click on that slide. And to change slides to move to one, there's the next frame button up here. So you can each grab one of your own, they're all the same. If you're having any trouble, feel free to unmute and ask or ask in the chat.
I don't have a text box tool there on the left.
No text box tool?
No.
Okay, does anyone have?
I'm not seeing that either.
Okay, I might have to update my sharing settings. Yes, I have you all as viewers, so let me get you all editing access. That would help. Okay. Any luck now if you refresh or click on the link again?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yep, got it now. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry about that. Virtual programs always have those little tech things going on behind the scenes. Okay, it looks like I see some people starting to add some text boxes, so you can claim a slide, add your little description, and then at the end, we'll all be able to scroll through and see some different ideas from all of our different museums. So it'll be a great kind of collaborative to look at things. But I'm going to go back to my slide here with the example in case you want to reference it while you're thinking about your Jamboard activity. And feel free to unmute if you have got any questions or anything you want to chat about while you're brainstorming. Oops, did not mean to move slides. There we go. I'm just looking through all of the ideas already coming up. These are great. On slide 2, I see the great idea of creating a house tour similar to a real estate home tour, where one can move through the house and view 360 degrees. I've seen some great examples of those. One I was exploring last week was the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. They have a really nice tour where it feels like you're walking through the museum and you can really zoom in and move around. Good. I see on slide 6, the idea of using some VR tours. That can be a really valuable tool. Slide 10 mentions using polling tools to modify the activity, adding some interaction there. That's always good too. Oh, great. In the chat, the virtual tour from the Florence Griswold House. Slide 10 in the substitute category, find the artifacts on past perfect and displayed on the screen as opposed to holding the artifact up to the camera. I think that's great because so many museums have already started or done the work of digitizing your artifacts. So it's always a great idea to make use of all that hard work. It can be a lot of fun. You can really zoom in on the details, sometimes more so than you could trying to hold it up to your camera. So that's a great idea.
If you want to see what each other are doing, if you click on the icons up at the top to the left of share, the various little circles up there, you can see what other people are doing.
Yes, the anonymous chameleon and the anonymous bat.
I don't know which one is you.
I like the idea as well on slide 3 about using a map. As we were talking about at the beginning of the session, maps are awesome and definitely a skill that students can always use more of. And if you haven't used Google My Maps before to create something, I highly recommend checking that out. It's really user-friendly and can add a fun layer of interactivity. Good, I see the idea of a choose your own adventure activity. That one's on slide 5, great idea. I see many of you adding ideas for multiple categories, so that's fantastic. Does anyone want to share any more thoughts on what you added up to your board? If anyone wants to hop on mic and share any, feel free. And you can always slide through the different slides and see what everyone's writing as well. All right. Any questions at this time too? Okay, so I will
Would
go
you
ahead.
choose something like this, Hillary, using whiteboards?
Yes, you definitely could. So depending on what platform you're using, you could certainly do it in like Zoom on the whiteboard. I just like to use Jamboard because it's my most familiar platform, but absolutely. I've even done it just like with a blank set of Google Slides as well. That can be another easy way to have something for students, participants to add to. And then there are some other platforms. One that I've used before is called Pear Deck, and it's kind of like a combination of asynchronous and synchronous. That one's fun to explore if you're thinking of doing anything that's asynchronous, not a live presentation. I'll just say that again, Pear Deck might be one to look into. That one's fun for school audiences. There's a lot of interactive features there. All right, so I'm going to go back to our SAMR model ocean diagram here. So again, your experience is going to be a lot different if you are doing your in-person program versus going out in the submarine and really redefining it. But if you are sticking with the substitution, augmentation, again, the function's not going to really change. You'll be delivering the same content. You'll be probably using a lot of the same artifacts or exhibits, just adding on to it using technology. Again, whether it's virtual or in person, just with some added tech. But for the modification and redefinition, this is really going to change the experience. It's not something that your visitor, your student would get on a typical tour. So if anyone has any experiences they've had with that you'd like to share, feel free. I'm going to bring up just one more example. And Brad mentioned when he was introducing me that I am the education advisor at Girl Museum, which is a totally virtual museum. So one of the things we do, since all of our programs are asynchronous, we don't do any live, we do a lot of Google Classroom based activities. And let's see, I'll share, let's take a look at this one. And I have it set up so when someone clicks on it, they get their own copy of this right to their Google Drive. Okay, so this is what our program looks like. It goes along with this, a virtual exhibit we have about alternative music. It's called Alternative Girls. And this would be quite different from an in-person program because students are really going to be able to interact. And they can actually record sound on this page. They can click around on different links. Like if you see, I click on these records, it links directly to some YouTube music videos. So it's an interactive Google slide with links kind of hidden all around it. So this could also be a format for doing some choose your own adventure things, where students can click around on different images and find links and activities on it. So on the second page of this activity, you'll see a new teal record has been added up here, and you can actually add your own music. So it instructs people on how to insert a hyperlink, add their own sound. And then on the last slide, there's a box to type in. So this could be something that could be shared directly with a teacher who could then disperse it via Google Classroom to their students. And it's added some tech that you wouldn't really be able to do in person. With the music video links, students are making their own choices here, adding their own sound. So that's just one quick example of kind of redefining the experience with that exhibit. And I can just quickly show you what the virtual exhibit that goes with it looks like. Which category are we in? Perhaps it's not on here at the moment. I will have to find it. But it's one of our most popular activities because it's really interactive. Whereas when we started, I'll just share one more example of one of our programs. When we started, we were just doing like a downloadable PDF that a teacher could print or project on their screen. So traditional discussion questions, some activities, but the interactive components really help students out if they are learning virtually, or if a teacher wants to send it out via Google Classroom. That is quite common now for teachers to do a lot of their assignments instead of paper pencil on Google Slides or something like that. So those are my couple of examples. Any questions at this point?
I have a quick question. I know you've already mentioned a few different virtual programs that we can use. I was like platforms for programming. I was wondering if there were any more you could use, or if you could just kind of go over them again, because I think a lot of what you're talking about uses new software that like we haven't really used at Kelowna museums. Like we've only just done Zoom.
Okay.
So I'd be interested to hear the other stuff.
Definitely. So like I said, I do a lot of the Google-based stuff. You can really do a lot with Google Slides. So that's a good starting point. Some of the others I use are called Kahoot. And this one's, again, fun for like school groups. You can input questions. You can even add like photos and videos to your questions, and then it's gamified. Students are playing this game, trying to win, answer quickly. Another one that's very similar to that I use a lot now is called GimKit. And this one's fun because it has different game modes. So students are like they had one that was Among Us themed. If you've been familiar with that game, it was really popular. Students are trying to find the imposter, and they're kind of battling against each other to answer these questions. So that adds a lot of fun gamification. Let's see. The other one I mentioned was Pear Deck. And this, typically I use it in conjunction with like a Zoom, and then students are taking a look at the slides in this Pear Deck platform while you're speaking to them through Zoom. And it has interactive features like students can type, they can answer polls, they can like arrange things on a drag and drop timeline or map. So that one can be really a great tool, I think, for museums with especially the timeline and map features. And all of these have like a free trial, or some of it is free, and then you subscribe if you want all of the features. So I highly recommend exploring those three if you're working with kids. Let's see. Those are the ones I use most commonly with student groups. Does anyone have questions about specific features that you're looking for? And maybe I can recommend a platform if it's not one of these. Okay, and feel free to reach out to if you're curious about other platforms. If you think of, oh, I'm really looking for something that does this, I can always provide some additional ideas or resources to those as well. All right, any other questions at this time? Just a super quick intro to this model, but I think it really helps to organize thoughts, because as I mentioned, I went from teaching in an in-person classroom, trying to figure out how to go online. It was a challenge for those first a few weeks or months, figuring out how can I do my favorite lesson plan, but online, and all the kids are at home and they probably don't have markers and construction paper. So figuring out how to take things online can be kind of a learning process. All right, if there aren't any other questions, I'll just share a little about the class that I teach in July with Brad in museum study. We go a lot more in depth in the SAMR model, as well as lots more tips and resources for different platforms and asynchronous versus synchronous programs. So if you're looking to do more online virtual programs, feel free to check out the course. And yeah, it's in July, so it's the whole month of July. All right, and as I promised, here's my contact.
Question.
Yeah.
Sorry, quick question. So one of the things we are looking at is not only setting up online programs like this that people can click on under our Learn site, but also possibly have some of them monetized. So for instance, you can do like a, one of the things I put down was the choose your own adventure. But if you wanted to take it another step and actually be able to see videos while you do the choose your own adventure, then there's a paywall or something, or some way of monetizing it. So that's kind of basically, we're a small site and funding is an issue. So to put everything up online and to be able to use all of these different platforms costs money, right? Like you can do the free trial and things, or the free version of it, but it only gives you so much access. So obviously we'd need to have subscriptions and things. So I'm looking for some way of monetizing it, and I don't know. I'm fairly techie, but not super techie. So setting something up like that on the website, have you ever any ideas on that? Or
Yeah, that can be challenging. If you have someone who creates your websites, they would be able to create some sort of paywall situation like you mentioned. But for me, I'm not that website savvy, like that side of the virtual program. So I would recommend, if it were me, I would use a site such as, maybe there's a few different platforms like this, but the one that comes to mind is called Kajabi. But there are a lot of these, but basically, or Teachable, that's another one I've used in the past. But you could maybe use this for if teachers are purchasing access to certain programs. Basically, you'd be setting up an online course, and this platform allows you to set up everything, your links to things, your videos, your recordings, all in there. And your students, your teachers purchasing this would sign up, and it could all be pretty hands-off for you. Once you set it up, they could go subscribe to it to get access, purchase the different features, and access it all right in there. So if you're not able to do it just on your own museum's website yourself, you could use a program like Kajabi or Teachable.
fabulous. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And any other questions? And here's my contact information, Twitter, LinkedIn, and email. If you have any questions that pop up, or if you wanted to share an idea, or if you create something and want to share it, that would be fantastic as well. But feel free to hang on to that, the Jamboard link as well, if you want to kind of peruse each other's ideas a little bit more later. And I know that can always help me when I'm brainstorming something new, to think about what others have done in the past. Again, not reinventing the wheel, but look at others' ideas. So if you don't have that link, you can scroll up in the chat and grab it again. And then Brad has also put the link to the YouTube channel where you can get this video and other resources as well, and the link to the course information for the summer.
So yeah, Hillary's course is a 4-week-long course. In the first week, she deals specifically with today's topic, by going into much more depth on the SAMR model. And then in the second week, we talk about asynchronous education, and you have an opportunity to build something using one of these tools that Hillary's talking about that is asynchronous. Week 3, we talk about synchronous education. You have a chance to build a synchronous program. And then in week 4, we talk about partnering with teachers.
Thanks again, everyone who came this evening. I appreciate it. And hopefully a little tidbit of information is useful here.
Yes, thank you all for joining us. As I mentioned before, this was our second webinar this year. We do have a couple more coming. I don't have the exact dates for them yet, but John Simmons will be doing 2 this year, one on collection management policies and one on laws related to collecting. So I will send out the link to the recording of this on our YouTube channel to everyone who signed up. So if you want to review anything, you can do it, or if you want to pass it on to someone else who you think might be interested, feel free to do that. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.